the Russia and Ukraine seem to have arrived at a compromise in the talks held at Turkey. Well, earlier talks were held in Belarus, but the problem with the Belarus is that it is a Russian ally. In fact, Belarus joined war along with Russia and Ukraine. So therefore, Turkey is a neutral destination for talks because Turkey has relations with both Russia and Ukraine. Turkey is a member of America-led, US-led North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, but in the recent past, the Turkey is coming closer to Russia. In fact, Turkey work alongside Russia in Syria also. So, though a member of US-led NATO, Turkey has a good economic and defense cooperation with Russia. For instance, 1/3 of the Turkey's gas requirements are met by imports from Russia. Similarly, Turkey has imported S-400 missile defense, anti-missile defense systems, which India has purchased from Russia also. In fact, US has imposed sanctions on its NATO allied Turkey for buying S-400 from Russia. So therefore, Turkey has actually condemned Russian action on Ukraine. But however, Turkey refused to join the sanctions regime imposed on Russia by the US-led Western powers. So therefore, Turkey was an ideal destination for talks between Russia and Ukraine. So the latest report suggests that the Russians have announced a withdrawal of the military operation. Not exactly the withdrawal, but the Russia has announced that it would reduce the military operations. What exactly does it mean? We have to wait and see. But the ground reports coming from Ukraine battlefield, reported by the international media, indicate that the Russia is slowly withdrawing its troops from the capital city of Kyiv and one of the other northern cities also. But what will happen in future, we really don't know. Russia says it has decided to reduce the military operations to instill trust in the ongoing talks. So the Russian statement said, we want to create mutual trust so that the future talks will progress on a productive lines. But however, President Zelensky of Ukraine said that he can't trust Russia, he can't believe Russian words. The words have to be matched by action on the ground. The US and the Western powers have simply rejected the Russian offer, stating that Russia is withdrawing only for further redeployment and a much bigger offensive. So we'll have to wait and see whether US apprehensions prove to be correct, or whether Ukrainian suspicion proves to be correct, or the Russian statement proves to be correct. So only the time will tell what will really happen. But what led to this kind of a compromise? So Russia has been fighting Ukraine for over 35 days. Last time when Russia attacked Georgia, it was only a 5-day war, and Russia has accomplished its political and military objectives in Georgia within 5 days. Russia was perhaps expecting a similar turnaround in Ukraine, but surprisingly, the Ukrainian resistance was much stronger. So therefore, Russia is increasingly dragged into a quagmire of war where it doesn't really know what will be the future outcome. So for over 35 days, despite military supremacy, Russia was unable to take the full control of Ukrainian land. So therefore, Russia may perhaps also thinking of a honorable retreat. So where on the other hand, Ukraine has realized that the NATO will not come to its rescue, US will not come to its rescue, because the US and NATO turned down Ukrainian request for a no-fly zone in Ukrainian skies. And US and NATO has even turned down the Ukrainian request for NATO soldiers to fight with Russia alongside the Ukrainian troops. So the US and NATO made it very clear that they will not directly participate in the war, because that would essentially mean a direct confrontation with Russia. So neither the United States nor its NATO allies are ready for a face-to-face military confrontation with Russia, because that would lead to much serious consequences. So therefore, Ukraine has realized that it has to fight the war on its own the only support which it may get is the humanitarian aid and also perhaps some military support in the form of weapons. So therefore Ukraine knows that the war will ultimately favor Russia. There may be a cost on Russia, but Russia's military supremacy is certainly much higher than compared to Ukraine. So therefore Ukraine and Russia are arriving at a compromise deal. So on the other hand, Ukraine has also acceded to the Russian primary demands. Russian demand was NATO should not expand towards Eastern Europe. In fact, this has been the demand for the Soviet era. So there was an agreement between the United States and Mikhail Gorbachev. And since then, there were a number of agreements. The US and the West promised that the American-led military alliance will not expand to the Eastern Europe. But contrary to these promises, the NATO has been expanding towards Eastern Europe, and around 13-14 countries like Romania, Poland and many other nations have become members of NATO. So when it came to Ukraine, it was Russia thought it is a red line. So it can't accept Ukraine embrace of NATO, because once Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, the American forces can attack Russia in 5 minutes. So therefore Russia was very particular about the Ukraine neutrality towards NATO. President Zelensky did not agree for this. He wanted to join NATO. US was keen on enrolling Ukraine into NATO, but however France and Germany vetoed the proposal because they were worried about the Russian reaction. So as Ukraine continued to try for NATO membership, Russia has invaded Ukraine. So now President Zelensky of Ukraine has proposed NATO neutrality. So if he had proposed this, the war wouldn't have begun, at least. So now the Ukraine agrees that it will not join NATO. But Russia doesn't believe Ukraine. Today Zelensky may be there, tomorrow somebody else may be there. Once the war is stopped, the Ukraine may retreat. So Russia wants not just Ukrainian assurance, but it wants even NATO to give a legal written guarantee that it would not enroll Ukraine as a member. So we have to see how US-led NATO will respond to this Russian demand that it will never ever enroll Ukraine as a member. Then comes the question of Ukrainian security guarantees. But when Ukraine has actually surrendered its nuclear arms, destroyed its nuclear arms, in response to that, the Russia, US and European powers have given a guarantee to Ukraine security. But this did not materialize and Russia invaded Ukraine. Now Ukraine wants a clear written guarantee for its security. That too not from Russia alone. If Russia gives a guarantee, there is no rule that the Russia will adhere to its promise. So the Ukraine is demanding a third party guarantee similar to that of the NATO. What does it mean? It means that the United States, China, France, Britain, Poland and Turkey should give a guarantee to Ukraine that if Ukraine is attacked, it will be perceived as an attack on their own country. That is how the NATO functions. If any member of NATO is attacked, the other members will respond as if it is an attack on them. So Ukraine wants a similar security guarantee from third nations, or it wants security guarantee from the permanent members of the United Nations. So therefore we'll have to see whether Russia will agree to this kind of a demand from Ukraine. However, the compromise is a healthy development because it will at least give some room for peace talks. So there are indications that the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia may meet, and even President Putin and President Zelensky may meet. So we'll have to wait and see how this compromise progresses in future.